podcast. My name is Sherry Stewart, and I'm here with my co-host, Jamie.
Hi, glad to be here.
And also with our guest this evening, and that is Sam Zimmerman.
Good evening. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. Every month, we look back at the games that were played by Gauntlet folks. So we're going to start out. Our first section is about the games that we play, both off and on Gauntlet. This month, in September, October of 2020, off Gauntlet, I played 7th Sea, an express version that was hacked up because that's how we do things. Take out all the bits we don't think we need, then regret it. Star Trek Express, same thing. 13th Age, and Hearts of Wulin Supernatural. On Gauntlet, I played Brinkwood Refuge, which is a playtest. Star Wars Saturdays Teens in Space, which is part of a series of Star Wars games that has been running for 3 years. I've also played in Apocalypse Keys, a playtest as well. In a Hearts of Wulin campaign, the Supernatural playbooks, this one in particular, a Urban Fantasy AU, because it just gets stranger and stranger. Mm-hmm. And then also in Free From the Yoke, an L5R hack of that game. But today what I want to talk about is Star Wars Saturdays Teens in Space. So what is it? Teens in Space is a rules-light, fast-paced storytelling game. It uses the Kids on Bikes system, so it's called Powered by Kids on Bikes. Mm-hmm. And that system and this game as well were written by John Gilmore and Doug Lavandowski. It uses all the dice. Skills get assigned to a dice type. You roll to beat a difficulty. Dice may explode. If you miss, you generate adversity tokens that you can use to kick off abilities or to help others. You have some advantages that you get to choose, and from the points that you could use to spend on advantages for yourself, you can use some of those points to put advantages on your ship. You get a ship. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that seems like a really important part.
Yes, it does. So we're teens and we have our own spaceship. That sounds awesome to me.
That also sounds incredibly unsafe, but okay.
Yeah, nothing can go wrong with that.
Nothing will go wrong. It's going to be easy.
We don't let teens drink, but they can have ships, like, that's okay.
One thing is with the game, we did place some tiny constraints on it just so that the system fit into the Star Wars universe a little bit better. So we just ignored a few options that looked like they were more Star Trek-like or maybe some other space opera story. And then we picked our trope. We switched a couple dice types between 2 skills just to fit our own concepts a little better. The GM for this game is Rich Rogers. He's an old hand at all things Star Wars and particularly brilliant as a GM when he has a flyweight trad system. So we're already in a good place. And then my other players are Sabine and Greg G, or Group Soliloquy, as I think of them in my head forever and ever. It will always be. If you ever come onto the Gauntlet Slack and you have some handle other than your name, I will always think of your handle before I put your name to your face. It's just the truth of the world. But I'm lucky because this is really a perfect group for this game. So what worked for me is this classic flyweight trad system. Character creation and the premise selection were all simple and sort of a familiar run down the list of things you're going to do for a session 0. Of course, the GM, Rich, was totally in his comfort zone. The system was very flavorsome. It sort of fit easily into the Star Wars system, so the hack wasn't one that was giving him any pressure or tension. The players were really good. They hit the spaceport running. We had great pre-game tone and expectations conversation where we really all kind of were on the same page, and we added things that we wanted to see, and it was just sort of exciting and fun. The session 0 was just so easy because we all had ideas for what we thought would be fun for our teams. Greg made a Solistan named Karwu and decided he would be a dreamer who found something significant, and since he wanted to live a life other than duty of toil, like most of his people did, we ended up, when we picked our ship, we chose one that had ancient tech, and we made it that Karwu had been the one who had found it. So that was sort of how we brought that idea that he had in with our ship. And the ancient ship tech that we picked, we decided that it was a ship from the Clone War era, and it came with a R1 series astromech droid, so we get all this perfect. Little goofy details, right?
And all the sounds.
Exactly.
So the important question is, did Rich make the sounds, is what I want to know.
No, he actually refrained. He tried to did it have basic, and Sabine was like, nope, you have to do the beeping. So,
yeah, exactly.
So there's a sort of war of wills going on there, which just adds to the delightfulness of the game.
Yes.
Rich chose that we'd be in the Minos cluster, which I think is a sort of fictional cluster that hasn't really been mentioned in the books or play. I don't know. I don't know how canon it is, but it's well documented. He likes it because it's got a good little map and everything. So we ended up using that. We picked a mining planet that Karwu was from, and then everything just rolled out from there. All of our ideas, all of our character specifics and stuff like that. So, here you are. You got a great GM. You got great players. A fun setting we were all excited about. The system was easy. It had enough flavor to get us to where we wanted to go. And it just felt frictionless in that way that something that you're totally familiar with does. What I was less sure about is, some of the character and ship advantages were intended to allow any sort of space setting, so there was a bunch of stuff we had to pitch out. I can't talk to any of that. How flavorsome the system is, I'm not sure. Because we were so caught up in the Star Wars universe, I didn't really kind of examine the universe that the vanilla game had. So if you just picked that up and you wanted to play a game without specifying the setting, I don't know what it's going to do for you all that much. It had a lot of broad ship advantages and some tropes that were definitely intended for other space settings. Nothing that I went, oh, that's weird. Just more like, I don't have time to think about what this would do in the game, if that's at this point. But the other thing I'm a little unsure about is I know I'm going to have a great time. This series will feel too short, and I'll end up mourning the end of the month. It's just inevitable at this point. But I think my takeaway is that these kinds of games are really my comfort zone. It comes with a GM-curated setting with curated incidents and NPCs. The players are empowered, but they're mostly in a reactive mode. They get to just concentrate on reacting to what's going on and having fun with characterizing their character and interacting with the other players and the NPCs. It's a delightful and easy-to-love system that feels really super familiar to me.
I've never actually gotten to play Kids on Bikes or any of those games, and I really want to. I really want to try it out. What part of the kind of teens genre did it really bring to the game? Because from a lot of what you're describing, it doesn't... I'm not getting a lot of the teenness coming from, we're in a mining cluster, and we've got this astromech droid... So, can you talk a little bit about that?
But being friends with an astromech
Sure.
teen thing. No, but yeah, go ahead, Sharon.
A lot of the teenness comes from this. A, it says it's for teens. B, the dice system is inherently swingy. And when you pick a trope, what you get is you get one skill that has a D20, one that has a D12, one that has a D10, one that has a D8, a D6, and a D4. So you're really good at one thing, and then you kind of run down the scale. So you've got swingy dice, you've got one or two skills that are worth a thing, and you've got difficulties that are being placed by the GM for the most delight at that time. So essentially what it is the teens are a conceit. There's nothing that is inherently teen-like. We are not having emotional problems that we deal with or, social problems or anything like that. And there's not a lot of that. It is really an agreement to play teens and some swingy dice, which means that you will be competent sometimes in one or two things and horrible at everything else is pretty much what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, right? Like how trad games or, my understanding and experience of traditional games is a lot of it is an agreement rather than something that is mechanically present, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, because I felt like Monster Hearts, when I first ran it, I was so impressed with how it tracked you in a good way as a teen because you couldn't be a good person. You couldn't express yourself well. You struggled. You could only shut people down. You could only turn them on by accident. You had to grow up to get the adult moves to actually learn how to communicate properly.
Right.
But trad games don't have that.
Trad games are not machines for drama.
Right.
They are an opportunity to interact with the world. And the book is going to be part of your conventions and the agreements that you have as you sit down. And I mean, that's why, in some ways, you're prone to get off-tone things when you've got players who aren't communicating or a GM they aren't looking out for the best of the thing. They're just kind of being punishing or something like that. I mean, you can get those things of where people aren't being their best selves or aren't on point or don't understand what the agreement might be, that you get those problems. They're just not built into the systems the way that a lot of the story games are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I really feel that because, The first time I played Monster Hearts, I was really worried because, like, at the time I was already in my 30s, and I was like, do I remember what it's like to be a teenager? That was a very, very long time ago.
The system will take you right back there.
Right, but I didn't recognize it at the time, right? Mm-hmm. So I went overboard. I was like, we're going to set this in the 90s. I have a 90s playlist. Our series song is Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls, just to, like, get it into the zone. I set it in my original high school, and it was so funny because Matthew, my partner, was with me, and so when I was describing teachers and parts of the school, he remembered it also. But then when I actually played the game, I was like, oh, I didn't have to worry so much because it's all built into... But, you know, at the same time, exactly. I think trad games can encourage GMs to really figure out how they can set things up so they can... It's more like of an art form, right? Like, it's more heavy GM load, but
exactly.
It's a good thing. Exactly.
That's it. It's you're sitting there and you have an excellent GM who's super comfortable with it, for whom setting incident and curating NPCs and making things happen is like breathing and second nature. And that's what makes it frictionless, is it's that the system is sort of just there enough to you make a roll, you go, woohoo, it turned out well, or uh-oh, I got to figure out how I failed, you know, and that's pretty much where it's functioning at.
And even beyond like mechanics, there's a lot of stuff that the book can do outside of just like, here's the dice rolls, that really pushes you into a specific mindset. Like, what items are you allowed to have? Are you carrying around like heavy weapons and blasters? Or are you carrying around a Walkman and like a teen magazine type thing? There are a lot of OSR games that rely really heavily on these like pick lists and setting generation tools to really kind of focus the whole group in on that specific genre, even if the dice mechanics don't kind of push you in that direction.
Right.
And there are some advantages to choose that they didn't strike me as particularly teen-like. And there's equipment, and I mean, the ship's a ship. Yeah, it didn't seem particularly teen-like to me, but again, I didn't examine it. I was rushing through to get to the Star Wars.
Yes.
So there you go.
You want to get to the Star Wars as quickly as possible.
I'll have to come back for a later one and, probably issue an apology because I didn't notice all the teen trappings in it, but...
I love that.
So tell us, Sam, what did you play this month?
I got a pretty interesting opportunity this month. I had 2 different long-term at-home groups change systems at the same time, which was a lot of work on my part. But I had one group change from Fellowship 2nd Edition to Root the RPG, and I had a second group that switched from Pathfinder 1st Edition to Hunter's Code, which is my working title for a Forged in the Dark game that I'm working on. That's kind of Witcher Monster Hunter inspired, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. I also got opportunities to play Dungeon World, Once More Into the Void, and the treasure at the end of this dungeon is an escape from this dungeon, and we will never escape from this dungeon. All of those off Gauntlet. And on Gauntlet, I got to play Balak Bayan, run by Jamie, Flotsam Adrift Among the Stars, and the game that I want to talk about, I got to host a series of For the Honor. So For the Honor is a game of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power with the serial numbers ever so lovingly just kind of brushed off with a light nail file. Mechanically, the game is a derivative of Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands by Vincent and McGay Baker. It's kind of set up as a interconnected series of little mini games that is a lot of fun and very different from a lot of other games, and I really enjoy the system. In our series, I got to play as Solara, who is the princess of the Sun Kingdom. She is this very kind of flamboyant, flies everywhere, billowing golden hair of wreathed in flame type deal. But almost instantly, we had this big major plot point where all of the princesses were having their power drained. And so I got to have that, like, how do you react when you lose all your powers? And what happens when you get your powers back at the end? And there's this big explosion Nova type thing. And so I played that up so much. I had a lot of fun with it. The other players, we had Jex, who is this resistance fighter, very inspiring and powerful young woman. We had Bethany playing. She was born in the wilds and very rough and tumble. Her description was intimidating, so she didn't actually have to beat people up. which is amazing.
Oh, I can really relate to that. My tattoos help me do that. I'm just gonna say that.
We had Maria, who is playing the wuxia prince melodrama, which was amazing and a ton of fun to deal with. And then we had Steven jump in with our Insecta spider princess, who is also afraid of spiders and was terrified anytime you mentioned the fact that she was actually half spider. And
okay, I really need to watch this because that sounds really amazing.
Yes. It was wonderful. What worked for me, the game is super lighthearted. It's very cartoons. The likelihood of death or serious injury is slim to none unless you really want to lean in on it and have that super dramatic moment, but you have to kind of pull that in if you want to do it. There might be some threats, there might be some danger, but everybody knows that you're going to get out of it at the end. The question is how and what cool powers are you going to use to get there. And so that's really where the fun comes from, is exploring that space. Every one of the characters felt super different, and it was wonderful. Even though there really aren't mechanical differences between any of the characters, your character is basically just a faction, a pick list of a couple of flavor text powers that are everything from baking to friendship to fire, and that's all you get. And then some questions about your history depending on what faction you pick. But really, other than that, it's up to you to make the characters really unique, and everybody did such a good job of really making their characters stand out and be this really cool, unique person, fully fleshed out person. And I think Firebrands as a system worked really well for what we wanted out of the game. It does a great job of kind of leading us down this specific emotional route that it wants you to kind of pull apart how you feel in any given moment, and really makes you trust in the other players and pulls out those emotional moments. And that was perfect for what we wanted out of the game. Once you get into the games, it flows really well. It's very well written in terms of once you're in the game and moving step to step to step, it does flow very, very well. To gush on the system for just a second, I absolutely love the idea that instead of adding a bunch of crunchy combat mechanics, the bakers basically took the combat mechanics and scaled them down, and took the discussion social mechanics and scaled them up to exactly the same level, and everything feels so cohesive, and everything feels like you're not changing systems when you go from a conversation to an argument to a full-on fist fight. It all feels like you're playing the same game the whole time, and it's perfect. Things that I am less sure about. There was a large portion of the game where I didn't really feel like we were super playing to the strengths of the system, because the games really kind of expect you to split up and have a short scene with two people here, and then one of those people goes off and has a different scene with a different person, and then you get all these little he said, she said type relationships where everybody's kind of mixed up and not everybody's together at the same time. And for whatever reason, the way that we kind of played out, about halfway through the second session, everybody was together, and we stayed together through the entire rest of the game.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of the genre, right? Because you're playing these princesses of power, and when I watch the cartoon, they do tend to clump up a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's this unconscious thing.
Yeah, so we saw the threat, we all got together to face the threat, and then we were like, what game do we play now? And all of them are two-player games, and we don't really know how to fit that in here. And so there was a little bit of dissonance with that.
Yeah, actually, I do want to bring up, I got to play For the Honor just one session, though. I didn't get to have a longer series. But one of the players, Jim, brought that up also. It felt like we picked the first game, and then it set us off on a different path. It felt like the game kind of punished us for not picking another one that would set up more conflict for us to play with. So I think what I would like is maybe a recommendation of well, if you want more conflict in the game, pick this, or if you want this, blah, blah, blah. But which may be in the full version. We don't know yet. But that's a good point.
Yeah. So yeah, it just kind of felt a little bit forced to get the right people in the right game to really figure out what's going on in the situation. Secondly, we ended up playing a really serious game for what it was.
Ooh.
It's not anything on the system, I don't think. For example, She-Ra, there's an entire episode where a bunch of bakers go and fight robots by spraying them with frosting and smashing them on the head with soda bottles, and it's just this very goofy, very silly fight, but it's still a fight scene. And we very much shied away from a lot of that. It was a lot more, I say grounded, but it was a lot more kind of superhero tropey instead of that very over-the-top, silly, cartoony drama. And so it was just a little bit off from what a lot of people were expecting going into the game. And I think it's just kind of how this group was, I think. We're a lot of very dramatic people. We love our emotions and driving to these very big climactic emotional moments. And when somebody's throwing a cupcake at you, it's a little awkward in those kind of situations. But I think you can definitely get that out of the game. We didn't, and it was a little bit strange. And then finally, our group kept trying to make the games go one to the next, to the next, to the next in a linear order because we were all clumped together. And so, where does the group go next? Where does the group go next? And that's not what the game really wants you to do. It wants you to be kind of out of sync, not in a linear pattern. It wants you to do flashbacks and things that are happening concurrently and jumping all over the place. And if we had kind of just given into that conceit from the beginning, I feel like it would have flowed a lot better. And you wouldn't have had this like, okay, well, now we need to move somewhere and then have this weird intermediate period of not playing a game, but role-playing to try and figure out what game we're going to play next. And so it was a little awkward, but takeaways, I had a great time. I really enjoyed the game, so I don't want to give that impression that it's not a good game. It is a great game. The version 1 just came out. I don't think the version that's out right now has all the layout stuff. I know Quinn Vega is finishing up, and the final version is going to be released sometime soon. I don't know when, but it's in a very close to final form, and it's very exciting.
Okay, so Jamie, why don't you tell us what you played this month on the Gauntlet and off the Gauntlet?
Yeah, so off the Gauntlet, I got to play Balikbayan, and I also got to play it on the Gauntlet as well. So I've been playing a lot of Apocalypse Keys off and on the Gauntlet. Yeah, actually, it's a little tricky because I started a lot of games off the Gauntlet, then I brought them to the Gauntlet, so it's a little squicky.
Gotta keep on doing that.
I started off in Brinkwood Refuge off the Gauntlet, then brought it onto the Gauntlet. I also, on the Gauntlet, properly in the Gauntlet, I got to play Gauntlet Comics Come in Prime, which is run by Jim, one of my favorite things. We get to be Vertigo, 90s comics, 2000 characters, which is a lot of fun. Got to play Hearts of Wulin, which is that same urban fantasy stuff. I've been finding like hot versions of our characters in this like urban fantasy wuxia setting, which is really fun. And I also got to play Teenage Nightmare, which is very cool. Recently started that one up. Teenage Nightmare is the Avery Alder's Belonging Outside Belonging version of Monster Heart. So we just started. I'm super excited to get into that. And we got to play Brinkwood Refuge, and Brinkwood Refuge is the game I'm going to talk about today. As some of you may know, I really love Brinkwood. I love it so much. So this is a Brinkwood fan game that I created that I'm working on. I love Brinkwood so much that this is my second game that I created for it, my second fan game. Brinkwood originally, it's Brinkwood, The Blood of Tyrants. It's a Forged in the Dark tabletop role-playing game about building rebellion that will overthrow the blood-soaked vampires that oppress and dominate your world. It's very satisfying. It's very, very good. It's very tactical. It's very focused because you know what you're doing. You're going after the vampires. But there are lots of different approaches. In my open campaign that I got to play on the Brinkwood Discord server, we had different GMs running at the same time. So if you got into a jammy game, it was always, what is your tragedy? Jammy will bring in body horror. They will hurt you. But if you got to play against, there was another person, it'd be fun, like you'd go in and break printing presses, or you would release like publications to like disrupt the vampire propaganda. And then there was another one where it was mostly a GM who liked to give players an excuse to blow things up. So it was always different each time. But because Brinkwood really rewards you, right, for your different approaches and how you want to address it, which is like a strength of Forged in the Dark. Like Forged in the Dark is very good at offering those different approaches. But for me, the most fun in Brinkwood is the changing of the masks that offer different things narratively and mechanically. Just very briefly, You can make a talky talk character. You can make a character that's very good at being social, but let's say you show up in a situation and you're not going to be able to talk your way out of it. You feel like, then you can put on the mask of violence, and using fey magic can be very violent. It's very satisfying. I love it so much. My favorite thing to do is to shock a GM and say, I'm going to pull out the mask of violence. I remember Leandra's face like, what? Like, you're going to do what? I thought you're going to talk your way out of this. It's a lot of fun. As a GM, I also like it when my players do that. But yeah, so that's Brinkwood. But then Refuge, the game, pulls it back and focuses on the slice of life aspects of running a rebellion in the Brinkwood. So instead we focus on deepening relationships, healing from trauma, and expanding the physical aspects of the Refuge. And tragedy is a very important aspect of Brinkwood. In the original game, when you make a character, you have to describe briefly what is the tragedy that radicalized you, what made you decide you have to stop the vampires no matter what. And so in Refuge, I took that same thing. You have to choose the tragedy that radicalized you, but it's something you actively work on healing or talking about or being open about in the game. It's a different side of it. I'll talk about building up the physical aspects in a bit, but basically, when I was thinking about what system would work best with what I wanted to do in the Refuge, I felt like belonging anti-belonging had to be the perfect system. So it's a game of no dice and no masters. I wholly recommend people to check out the +1 Forward series with Rich and Rach. They talk to different folks about different games that are belonging anti-belonging. It's also known as No Dice and No Masters. I highly recommend that. It's a great series. Sam and I are on it. Just a disclaimer, but I still think I'm allowed to think it's awesome, I think. So, but talking about Refuge, what worked for me? I wanted to make a BOB game that's easier for veterans of TTRPGs to understand the GM full narrative system. So this happened because I ran a playtest of our magical school with Sherry, Joel, Daryl, and David. Only Daryl and I had an easy time. Only Daryl and I were like, yes, we're picking up setting elements, we're putting them down, we're creating NPCs. But Sherry and Joel and David are like, we can do anything?
What does that mean? Do you want me to do that?
So a lot of the sessions were like, can you pick it up? Maybe Joel? And Joel kept like disappearing into the background. So I was like, I want to address this. I want to make it easier because it felt like setting elements were just too hard to pick up and put down for veteran players. The way Joel described it was, if it's my choice to pick up the setting element, then I can choose to never pick it up, is how he put it. So, like I said, less proactive players tend to stay in the background, while players with more GM experience lose their characters and they become incomplete GM. So I felt like Daryl and I, we kept setting aside our characters so we could pick up the GM reins. And so I think we're going to talk about this in our discussion later, but I just briefly want to say that as veterans, we have modes of play that are ingrained in us. And the fluidity of a GM full game is often overwhelming to veterans who are used to specific roles and expectations, like what Sherry brought up earlier when she was talking about teens in space. So instead, Refuge gives you a very specific set of guidelines to build your GM role from. So each playbook is connected to a unique physical aspect of the Refuge. So I'm trying to build it in, and over time, each physical aspect can take on more aspects, which leads me to my second point, which is base building ended up being more fun than I anticipated. I just put that in because I was like, I want progression of some kind. Mm-hmm. I guess this could work. It could be like a video game. I wasn't really thinking too hard. I was like, you spend this number of tokens to unlock new things. But we had so much fun from the first session alone because examples of components are the hearth can have the kitchen, it can have the shelter, the healing tent, you can add an apothecary, and the bathhouse. The bathhouse was very legendary in our playtest group with Sherry. So
it's like you had to build it. But I mean, that was the thing is we all took a bunch of the weak moves. We did the things that put us into all these kinds of dramatically awkward things, and we didn't solve any of our problems, but we built a bathhouse.
Yeah.
So,
because this is something that has been brought up by Daryl and other players, where in BOB, it's very easy to set up problems, but then it feels just as easy to get rid of them almost immediately, which is not very satisfying for a lot of people. So in Refuge, I have if you save your tokens, you can have a bathhouse. So maybe you want to do that. And also I made it that currently I'm still playtesting this, but it feels pretty good for now that it takes 2 tokens to do a strong move instead of just 1. So actually, when I think about it, most of our characters, we've had like several sessions, we're not very good at strong moves. We just keep talking about our tragedy or causing problems for each other. But it feels very slice of life that way, I feel.
Yes. We've all done at least one strong move when it was something that we just couldn't let go. But
Yeah. And that feels like a really special moment in an anime episode, right? Where like, I have to rise to the occasion and be a better person.
This is who they really could be if they only...
That very much feels like a jammy game. It's very much just like, let's wallow in our tragedies and understand ourselves, and then every once in a while we'll have this little glimmer of hope come out.
Yes, I'm just trying to build the perfect engine for that. So I feel like I'm getting close in Refuge for it. And what's cool about unlocking more aspects is that you get to change aspects of the story. Like for the Changeling, that was the playbook I picked because, I had to go for the sad, magical one, I start with the Sanctuary, but then we decided together to discover the cave. So then that became more mystical and spooky because one of the moves I unlocked was to have a Fey ghost become part of the story. So that instantly changes the tone of the scene. So that was a lot of fun. I feel like as a group, we look forward to base building at the end of every session. So here I go again. I love having end of session moves that help decompress and reflect and really... and in this case, it would build up what we wanted to see. So we got the bathhouse and we were like, we're going to have a makeover in the next session because one of the moves we unlocked was to change an essential part of your look. So we'll have makeovers next time. I also feel like it was balancing out the power gamers because I'm very much a power gamer. In B.O.B., I am just like chomping at those weak moves like anything. But because that can happen, in Refuge, I've built in ways you can like give your tokens to other people, or when it comes to the base building. So Sherry and I gave Joel all of our tokens so we could get the bathhouse, right? Because it's difficult for one player to do it on their own. So because of that, you feel less guilty being a power gamer. Like you can be like, well, I'm doing this for the bathhouse. Okay, there was more than the bathhouse, but we really love the bathhouse. I just have to put that out there. Aside from that, and then every time you give the tokens, you get to describe in story terms what that means. So you get to connect to the other player, get to discuss and describe the refuge more, which is really fun. What I also really liked is the game is so cozy. I have finally unlocked my ability to design and play cozy games with confidence because all I can do is tragedy very well. I still have to put tragedy at the heart of this game, but still, I feel like I have grown as a person. So every session of Refuge feels really warm and inviting, but it's also full of surprises. So in the last session we played, it was so mysterious. It was so sad. We introduced the Keeper of the Masks. That was really, really cool. And we went into the mystery of these vampire artifacts with the historian. By the end of it, we had a ritual to create the Mask of Subjugation, except the Keeper didn't tell us that it was the Mask of Subjugation. They kept that from us. So it was very cool. I really liked it, but it still felt cozy somehow because we were still focused on relationships. The last positive point I want to bring up is that Brinkwood is a very rich world in context and implication. So playing the game is so much fun and offers such depth of story. But I keep thinking about other aspects that can't really be effectively explored in a Forge of the Dark system or just in the scope of the game, right? I don't think every game should do everything, for sure. So I'm in love with the idea of a universe of games, which we're already seeing. Like, for example, Rich has created this universe of Star Wars games with all the hacks. We also have Gauntlet Comics. But I also just want to create several, quotation mark, official games within the same game world and explore different ideas.
Yeah, Trophy is doing a fantastic job of doing that. And I absolutely love that Trophy is doing this. And I'm excited to see another game like Brinkwood trying to do a similar idea.
Yeah, exactly. Because like Trophy Dark and Trophy Gold have the same core, but it feels so different. But it feels like you're part of the same world, which is really good. Trophy
Colossus is going to be a whole new thing. And it's wonderful, and I'm very excited.
That's right. I forgot about Colossus. That's right. I'm so excited. So there's a lot of good stuff. And yeah, I like the idea of a universe of games. I definitely want to see more of that for sure. What I'm less sure about Brinkwood Refuge is I feel like the game stands on its own, meaning you don't need to know Brinkwood, but I'll need to keep playtesting for sure. Worst comes to worst, if playing Refuge makes someone want to play Brinkwood, I feel like I've also done my job. So that's sort of what's been happening, where we created our Refuge characters and a lot of us are like, but what if you play a game of Brinkwood too? So I want to do that. Like, we'll play Brinkwood and then in between their Refuge sessions. Also, the second thing is Refuge is a complex BOB game, but having said that, I think Belonging Outside Belonging appears to be simple when it isn't. It's a system that requires multiple sessions per game for you to really get the hang of the characters and moves and the flow of play, especially if you're new to the system. And Refuge shows these aspects more clearly. So I think folks thinking a narrative game or a story game is simple may be surprised when they pick up Refuge, or even Firebrand. There's a different paradigm that we have to operate from, where we tell ourselves, oh, narrative and story is easier, but I don't think that's true. I think it's just a different set of skills that we need to call upon. So we shall see. I could be wrong about it, so that's what the playtesting is for. My main takeaway is, I feel like I say this all the time, but I'm always excited about the potential of a system. I'm so glad Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum created the Belonging Outside Belonging system. I'm eager to see where this goes next. I think a good example is J Dragon's Wander Home, which is so different from what we expect from BOB, but it still has that same core of interaction and emotional connection, so I'm super excited about it. And the last point I want to make is I want to play more decolonial games. So a game that actively engages in the act of decolonization can be interpreted in many different ways. So for those of us who live in places deeply wounded by colonization, such as me, I live in the Philippines, it's a very personal journey that can't be generalized. So my journey of decolonization is not going to be the same for someone in the States, for example. For me, and now, what it means to play a game of decolonization is it means creating and playing games that put relationships and communities first. And I feel like more than ever we need games that can do that. This year has been tough because it feels like it's just a long-term pattern of being ripped apart as communities. So I feel like we need to learn collectively that relationships and communities are some of the most important things. And I think we can learn that through games in lots of interesting ways. But yeah, so that's me. That's Brinkwood Refuge. Do we have any questions?
I have one comment, and that's that one of the things is, as a player, coming into it, the thing though, as we build the bases up and you take on more GM full responsibilities because you have these additional facilities and stuff, it does make it like you're taking little bites out of what you're responsible for, and it helps a lot. You get that chance to kind of get a sense of, oh, what is it that I can ask the players to do? What is it that is the core idea behind these places, these things, this part of the refuge? And you bring it in and you build up a history so that it feels very natural. It's not like there's a whole city there right away. You start with very simple little setup and you create the history of that, and then you make a little bit more, you extend things out a little bit more. It just really helps when you're trying to get a handle on all the different things you can do.
Yeah, I want to create a game that will help people be more confident. So I'm hoping Refuge is teaching that bit by bit.
I did have one thing that I wanted to say. I absolutely love the idea of the home base of a larger effort turning into its own game. And I feel like there's a lot of really cool spaces that you can go with that outside of Brinkwood.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi listeners, Jason from Gauntlet Publishing here. I want to tell you about a couple of new things we have for you this month. The first is Nephews in Peril, a major expansion for Brindlewood Bay, the game of cozy murder mysteries and supernatural horror. Nephews in Peril is a collection of 6 new mysteries for the game, each by a different fabulous author, and some revised rules and gameplay advice. It can be found in the $6 plus Gauntlet Patreon feed until October 15th, and then Drive-Thru RPG after that. The next thing I want to tell you about is Codex Home, the first issue in Volume 5 of the magazine. Codex Home features new material for Trophy Gold and Brindlewood Bay, plus the all-new game Back Again from the Broken Land, which is about fantasy heroes recounting stories as they return home from a calamitous war against a dark lord. all while evading the remnants of that Dark Lord's army. It's a fantastic Powered by the Apocalypse game, and we're delighted to share it with you later in October. Remember, your contributions to the Gauntlet Patreon help support everything we do in the community, including this very podcast. As always, thanks so much for your support.
So, listeners, we're going to move on to our second segment at this time. So, Sam, why don't you tell us what you would like to talk about today?
Yeah, so today I kind of want to just poll the room, see what people are thinking about belonging outside belonging, offer some of my experiences with the game, and see how those opinions jive with you and what your opinions are coming back at me, and maybe we can flesh out some things, understand a little bit more about the system, and see where we're going. So I kind of formatted it in the same way as the first section of like things that worked for me. And so the things that really stand out to me about No Dice, No Masters as a mechanic, as a system-ish, is that it really, really shines in two styles of gameplay. And those two styles are games like Dream Apart, Dream Askew, Sleepaway, Revolution, Balik Bayan, games like that where you have this tight group of PCs who have all these connections with each other, but the world is trying to rip them apart or crush them together or mangle that fabric of relationships in any way that it possibly can. And you're trying to pull apart that drama, see where the strings break, figure out how the fabric tears. And it really does a good job of this cycle of outside pressure causing interplayer drama, so you use all your tokens with drama stuff and then you don't have any tokens to deal with the next big outside pressure thing, and it just cycles. But that relies on having players be very willing to pick up those setting elements, ramp up the pressure, put people in these bad situations together, and focus everything back on the relationships and not just here's a gang, deal with the gang. It's a, here's a gang, how do you deal with the person standing next to you who is potentially part of that gang? Do you trust them? Really, it takes a good amount of system knowledge and system willingness to play with that in order to get that to really click. And I think it just takes a little bit of practice.
Yeah, because like I remember when we were playing together, Sam, in one of our games, there was a player who was worried about causing problems for someone else. And I feel like this is tied to how, as traditional players, we're worried about being efficient. We're worried about the pressure to perform. Like, we don't want to, especially because we don't have dice or a GM to hide behind. It's going to be like, well, if someone's going to create a problem, you have to be very clear that you're creating a problem. We're not mad at GMs for creating issues. We're not mad at GMs for like offering these challenges or opportunities. So why are we not okay with players doing that? Because I've witnessed it, right, in games where like a player does something that's very true to who their character is, and the rest of the players are like, oh, seriously, like you're creating problems for the rest of us. But I think BOB is really like entrusting in each other, and I enjoy doing weak moves in BOB because it means I know that other players can help me. I'm giving the other players opportunities to step in and help. Like in Balik Bayan, the Dewata has a way to ask, how do I lose control in this situation? Like, what do I destroy? And I like that question's always there because everyone's always worried the Dewata is going to ask. But in a good way, I feel like in my European game of Balik Bayan, whenever Will asked that as a Dewata, everybody would be like, oh, here we go. This is going to be super good.
My favorite question in any of those games is, how can I screw this up right now? That is a great kind of stepping stone. Is like asking the group, how can I screw this up right now? And then putting it at this like, hey, I want to create this drama right now. Mm-hmm. Give me permission to do something that you're okay with.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. Yeah. Because like, I feel like BOB really sings when everybody knows that they can jump in or step in and tweak as much as they like, rather than having those really clear-cut roles.
I think roles help, but we'll get there in a second.
Yeah. And speaking to that whole sort of thing of being ready to create drama, I know that the hesitancy comes directly from playing trad being in a thing where it's you against the environment, you and the other players are against whatever is happening in the outside world. And you're fighting dice rolls and the incidents to get to success or whatever it is that you want to. And drama is sort of a byproduct of bad dice or a byproduct of these things. So it, like when you go, oh, I'm going to put them at a disadvantage. No, I can't do that, because you're still thinking, oh, the dice are going to mess us up too. But there are no dice. So it's that whole thing of being alarmed about a game that has no control on certain things. And now you have kind of control, and where it gets interesting is where that drama hits and that trust to do that drama. But it is a very different take on a story. And for me, I do hesitate.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think one of the things is, for example, in Wanderhome, Jay doesn't even refer to the moves as strong, regular, or weak moves anymore. Jay just writes down, spend a token to do this, you earn a token when you do this, but you can always do this. That's how it was worded instead in Wanderhome. And I feel like that's kind of true, because when I write weak moves now, I don't necessarily think they're all bad. It just means you can't just depend on yourself, or you have to allow yourself to be a little vulnerable. That's what some of the moves are written to be, to encourage people to do that. So in Oathbreakers, it's like, well, you're going to have to talk to someone from a specific faction and ask what they want and work towards it. In Refuge, it's like, well, now it's time to talk about your tragedy openly. Actually, what I like is, Sherry, with your character, the times that you hide your pain behind a smile when you use that move, or when you put other people first and stuff.
But that's pathos, not drama in some ways, you know, that's far more comfortable with pathos.
Good, yeah. A good set of weak moves pushes you into those drama situations. But that mention of Wanderhome was kind of a good segue into the second realm of where I think that No Dice, No Masters really shines, and that's taking these bigger, more complex worlds and then refocusing everything on a small cast and the small dramas that happen within that cast, and resetting it as this a little, I don't want to say truly slice of life. In some games like Brinkwood Refuge, it is a very slice of life thing. But I would also put Venture or Galactic in this realm, where you're taking this big, very active, very chaotic world and then making it smaller and making it more personal and making it more kind of emotionally intense, where you can't get that in a lot of other games. And that it's because you have these very tight relationships and very close-knit relationships, and that's really all you have in some cases. No Dice, No Masters, Belonging Outside Belonging does a really good job of focusing in on those topics.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like one of the ways the game really shines is in exploring the nuance of relationships. And I think different systems, respond to this in different ways. Like PBTA has done some interesting and amazing things to engage with social mechanics. Immediately, Pasión de las Pasiones and bite marks come to mind, for example. I also like BOB's space in that, because BOB teaches us how to engage with the slice of life, like you brought up, Sam, and the relationships and how it helps players. And also, it gives this openness of, how much do you want to lean into your moves? Because I think a mistake some people make is, oh, I can't do this thing in BOB unless I have a move for it. But the moves are more of like a guideline that you can hit and ping as much as you like. And then the rest of the time you can just do stuff that's outside of the moves. It's really just there to guide you in play, basically. Definitely, I like how relationships are often centered, because we have our lures that ask us to interact with a player in a certain way. We have our weak moves that often ask us to engage in that drama with other players.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the weak moves is that they can have that thing where it says play into your personal flaws, the things that kind of cause you hurt, and your lures give people a way to put hurt on you, essentially. They're not big hurt, they're not huge drama. It's those little things that you already are prone to allow happening. It's your insecurities, it's your feeling unworthy, it's whatever little character thing you have going on. It's those weak moves are saying play with that. Mm-hmm. Bring the pathos, bring the sadness, make it inadvertent, and all the more sad for that no one meant to place more burdens on you. They just did because you always accept them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's kind of beautiful in its own way because it's very real life.
Yeah, and so I think when we talk about relationships and the drama that we engage with each other, Belonging Outside Belonging is also good at making us rethink what roles in TTRPGs are. So what makes us a player? What makes us a GM? Why are those answers so immutable? And so TTRPGs have been around for a long time. And for almost as long, indie designers have been asking these questions in pointed ways. But why hasn't that shifted in mainstream games? Like when I look at mainstream games, it's still very much, this is the GM's role, this is the player's role. It doesn't really change much. I think the biggest examples that I can think of in mainstream games where that shifts slightly is PBTA, where you ask a lot of questions, or it's built into the system, right? In Powered by the Apocalypse, where you can defer to the players, but it's still, there's still the role. The role is still there. And for me personally, I think this shows that those who have the most say in TTRPG spaces are focused on immovable and immutable roles of play. But what do you think about roles, Sam?
Yes, the No Dice, No Masters space is this weird little nebulous ball that's not quite a player and it's not quite a GM, but the best luck that I've had when I'm playing a game is feeling like I'm in that GM mode 100% of the time and letting the other players also act in that GM mode and just kind of turning off that no, I'm the only GM switch.
Right.
And that's kind of the easiest way that I was able to just get into the system was basically turn off the thing that's telling me you are the only GM, but still being a GM for pretty much the entire game. And very much that PBTA GM, that GM that's asking questions, that's trying to engage the players in the scene and trying to bring other people in and trying to create the drama between everything that's going on, and then realizing that you happen to have a favorite NPC that you play with a lot and you bring into every scene whenever you can. And that's kind of how it ended up feeling for me at the beginning. And then as you get more used to it, you can kind of lean into player sometime and move back and forth in that space. To me, one of the things that really does help with that is the setting elements and the ways that setting elements work, because it's much easier for me to pick up a new piece of paper and look at it and say, I am in a more GM role now because I am the setting, versus I am the player and I'm holding my character sheet right now. It's not a, like, I'm going from session to session and changing GM to player. It's a minute to minute, scene to scene, I am changing GM to player, but it always helps to have that physical, like, I have the setting sheet in my hand.
Yeah, and that's funny because I actually don't like the setting elements as they are. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
So it's pretty much why I push against it the most when I design my games. Like, I think it shows with Black Vine, I was already trying to introduce certain things, and then bit by bit, and so by the time we got to, like, in Through a Mirror Darkly, I removed the desires and stuff, and I built in, like, those GM-like questions that you have, because it's a horror game. It's a one-shot horror game, so I wanted to build in safety tools of asking and bringing that forth. But by the time I got to Refuge, it was, goodbye, setting elements. You have served me well. I'll see you again next time. Because when I see people who aren't used to the system, they have their playbooks, and then when they pick up a setting element, it's so light, it's so blank, it's so open to interpretation that they kind of freeze up. And so I feel like setting elements are useful if you're used to being a GM. But if you're not used to being a GM, I don't know if the setting elements can really be that clear. So instead, what I do is, like in Refuge, I've built it in where at the start of the game you ask these questions, at the start of the scene you ask these questions, and at the end of the game you ask these questions. What I was trying to do was to get players used to, like, oh, I don't have to play my character necessarily, I can play one of the NPCs. So for me, BOB really shines when you have several players playing several NPCs and several players playing their own characters, but you still have one person who is the location, who is the main-ish GM. And I feel like so far that's when it, like, slots into play for me. So far, right? But it's a very personal thing.
I definitely agree that there is a very nice sweet spot of you have a couple of characters playing their main characters and you have a couple of people playing setting elements. Because when you have one character and a lot of setting elements, it's weird and it doesn't quite work. And when you have everyone playing their own character and no setting elements, it also is weird. And I've tried that and it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
Knowing that and trying to hit that spot is something you have to look out for when you're facilitating a game like this.
Yeah, I think having the setting elements have those moves on them makes it super clear in Refuge of what you're supposed to do. Like, what are the kinds of things you're setting up so that those questions would be relevant questions and that sort of thing. And then what are you doing? Like for NPCs is just easy. You're in there, and NPCs are the thing where you get to be reactive in some ways.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. That's true. You don't have to think about your moves. You're just reacting as an NPC.
Exactly. So that's like you get to go back to old school characterization where you're just reactive when you're being an NPC. When you're being your character, of course, the other characters have your lures, you have your moves and stuff. So definitely for me right now, when I'm doing the setting thing, I prefer to do an NPC than to do my character, because I'm still at that point where there's too many pieces coming at me. I haven't internalized what the options are. So again, like you say, having a piece of paper is good. That's the one bad thing about online is it's harder to get a crib note.
Yeah.
So I need to make a crib notes. That's all.
That's true.
You know?
But yeah, definitely, like, it's a lot to do if you're not used to it.
Yeah. In addition to Brinkwood, there are a couple of other games that do fun things with this setting element role. One of the things that I did with Revolution is that the setting elements are factions within the city. It's a political game set during the French Revolution, and so each player plays their faction, and the way it's described is these are the moves that you can use even when you're not in the scene.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And
it's
so
super cool. It's very good.
It says even when you are in the scene, you are still the representative of the rebellion. You can still use the rebellion's moves, but even when you're not in the scene, you can have the rebellion influence the scene in some way by bringing in an NPC or a mob or however you want to do it. And so that kind of helps people get into that space a little bit better. And then the other game that's really cool I'm playing right now, Flotsam Adrift Amongst the Stars. Flotsam is what I've been calling it. What it does is it sets up exactly who is the focus of the scene and gives them the authority to dole out responsibilities. What it would do is say, Jamie, you are the central character of this scene. You get to pick what other main characters are in the scene. You get to pick what setting elements you want to engage with, and you get to give those to the people who aren't in the scene and say, okay, you are playing as the gangs, you are playing as the above, you are playing as something. And so it takes a lot of that like wishy-washy, like, okay, who do I want to be in this scene? Who's going to do this? Are you okay with being in this scene? It takes a lot of that out, and it helps really facilitate getting into that mode of play where if I'm given something, I'm more apt to look at it and say, okay, this is all I care about, this one thing that you've given me, versus there's 10 setting elements on the table and I have to figure out what I'm going to do.
That sounds super, super cool.
I have a thing that I'm excited about.
Ooh.
Instead of tokens, people using other things like, let's say, tarot cards. Let's talk about that, because then at that point, your tarot cards have different uses, and so you get yourself a token, and instead of going, oh, I can do this move, now all of a sudden you're going, oh no, if I'm going to use this, I have a smaller set of moves that I can make from it. I can only do this one thing. When is the right time? Should I trade it away? What do I do? So talk to me a little bit about adding that as a currency in.
Yeah, because I think it was Sam who first introduced it, right? Which I lovingly stole from.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
stolen. I thought it was Jamie. I'm like, oh, Jamie, you're a genius.
Oh, no. But then that's when I first started bringing up Sam, right? I was like, no, Sam's a genius.
Yeah, I originally had the idea because the whole idea of tarot reading and using the tarot as this like divination tool really started in the political 1750s, 1760s in France. And so that was exactly what you would use. They were using tarot cards as the typical playing cards during that time. And so it really was a very good kind of narrative fit. And then I started playing with it. I was like, oh, I like this. I like forcing people to look at other things, because I've played a good amount of Dream Apart, and every time I do, there's always the one character that's like, oh, I've got one strong move, and I always use that same strong move over and over and over again.
Right.
And it's like, okay, we get it. You can kill someone. Good job. Or whatever move it happens to be. But forcing you to look at your other tools and like really feel out every tool in your toolbox before you can, depending on what you happen to have in your hand at any given time, really does change the way the setting works. Because in some situations, you might be, I either have to use this move that doesn't quite fit what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. Or I have to do another weak move and get more cards, which puts you into more of a hole and creates this spiral. And so all of that together really feeds into this really different kind of structure of play.
Mm-hmm. I think what I don't like, though, is when people say, oh, BOB is really good at being a one-shot game. And I'm like, that is patently untrue. Like, I feel like, number one, setup can take a while depending on the game. And number two, it can take a while to get the hang of your character, your playbook, the setting elements. Like, I feel like it's a skill set that really rewards experimentation and trying things and exploring. And I don't think that's something that can be super satisfying in a one-shot.
No, I tend to agree, because I think a lot of what makes No Dice, No Masters really shine, Belonging Outside Belonging, is that you get this, as I kind of mentioned earlier, this metaphor of like the fabric, where it takes a little bit to build that fabric of relationships, and then it takes even longer for the setting elements to come in and start pulling at it and breaking things. And so you can't really get all of that in a single session. It's really hard to do because there's a lot of build up. There's a lot of slow build towards something that's very interesting and dramatic, and the payoff is fantastic, but it takes a while to get there sometimes.
For sure.
Belonging Outside Belonging as a whole is very young and very fresh and new, and I think a lot of people are excited about that fresh new space that hasn't really been tested. And there's a lot of cool things that are going on there. There's a lot of little experimentation. I'm very excited to see where people start just absolutely ripping things to shreds and putting the pieces back together in a barely recognizable way. I think that this is going to grow and become something that's really, really cool.
Listeners, for our third segment, it's Giving Me Life. This is where we each discuss something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy. So, for myself, Sherry, what is giving me life is my new Yoshitani tarot deck. The Tarot of the Divine. It says right on the box that the tarot was inspired by deities, folklore, and fairy tales from around the world. When I saw that the Fool was the Little Mermaid, I knew it was the tarot for me, because what is, giving something up, giving your past life up for a love that may be, or, could work out. It's so brave and it's so foolish. I was like, yep, that's it. It comes with a guidebook for the tarot, but it also comes with a little book that has a short synopsis of each of the deities' folklore tales and fairy tales that's in there, so that you get a chance to, like, if you aren't familiar with them, to read a little bit. And the illustrations are lovely. They are just absolutely beautiful, and they're a little bit queer. And it is a lovely, lovely deck. So, wonderful, good fun.
That's wonderful.
Sam, what's giving you life?
Giving me life right now is No Man's Sky. It recently got a pretty big update, like only a couple of weeks ago, and I have kind of gotten back into it after a pretty long multi-year hiatus, and there's so much new stuff, and everything is very weird, and it's got a very, like, OSR Into the Unknown, exploring the weirdness of the world type feel to it, and trying to understand what's going on and realizing that you're this tiny little speck in this vast ocean of nothingness and trying to carve out your own little space. It's very fun. It's very satisfying when you finally get something to work or find that one thing you've been looking for 2 hours or whatever it ends up being. But it's been giving me a lot of joy recently.
Awesome. And Jamie, what is giving you life?
I really love YouTube. I bring it up every so often. Currently, what's giving me life is Emmy Made in Japan. So she got viral for creating retro recipes or recreating retro recipes, which are really horrific. It was a difficult time in the States, I guess, when they just depended on canned food a lot. So really intense stuff. But I feel like in the last year especially, like she's really hit her stride as a YouTuber. There's this really nice calming presence about her. The comment section is always like, oh, it's like a new Bob Ross, or it's like a new Mr. Rogers. Like, it's very calming at the start of each episode. It's like, hello, my lovelies. It's so nice to see you. How are you doing? While she does things like a reversed grilled cheese sandwich where instead it's like 2 slices of cheese and bread in the middle. Or she'll try to recreate this Korean street food recipe, and it's really nice. Like, you can tell she's like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but we'll figure it out together. And it's very calming. It's very sweet. It's giving me a lot of life.
Well, thank you, listeners. You can find out more about the Gauntlet at www.gauntlet-rpg.com, where you'll find more information about our podcasts, our forums, free online gaming resources, our game calendars, and the next online gaming con, and so much more. If you're interested in supporting us, you can also check out patreon.com/gauntlet, where you can sign up for levels that'll get you free and early access to our amazing Codex zine, as well as RSVP access to our Gauntlet calendar. Thank you.